Hey there, and welcome. I'm Anna Hartman, and this is Unreal Results, a podcast where I help you get better outcomes and gain the confidence that you can help anyone, even the most complex cases. Join me as I teach about the influence of the visceral organs and the nervous system on movement, pain, and injuries, all while shifting the paradigm of what whole body assessment and treatment really looks like. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Unreal Results podcast. Special episode. I've got a guest today. I teased it in the last episode, so if you listen to that, you already know who it is, but it's my friend McInnes Watson. So stoked to have him on the pod. I don't do a ton of guest episodes, so when I do pick somebody to come on, it's because I really resonate with what they have to share with the world, and I want to get it out there, and that it also ultimately fits in this big picture of more of a whole organism approach, looking at the body in a way that considers the nervous system and the viscera and that kind of thing. And so you might already know of him. He is the Plus Plyos guy on the social medias. And so you might wonder, like, oh, how does plyometrics fit in this view? And this is like the beauty of why I brought him on, is because it's for the first time listening to somebody talk about plyometrics that I felt like, oh my gosh, he gets it from an organism standpoint of like our fundamental drive for survival and safety in the body, and how that sort of trumps everything, no matter where you come into it from, what level you come in from it from. It's always about the body, like doing whatever it needs to stay safe. So I'll let him do a little bit more of an intro for himself, but welcome, Matt. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me in. I appreciate the kind introduction. Yeah, it's we were just saying off air that we kind of cross paths with Shante, and then we'd kind of done a bit of work together, and it was very quickly apparent that we spoke the same language and we saw things through very similar lenses. So I always find that fascinating when, like, maybe I don't have a rehab background, or like I'll meet someone else that has a completely different background to me, and then we're like, oh, we're speaking the same sort of, the same way. And it really, I think you're right, it goes back to starting with like a fundamental kind of way of looking at things and saying, like, how does our body react to things in a very simple way, but a humanistic kind of way? How do we react as an organism? That is, like, where are our founding fundamentals and where do they come from? And protecting ourselves, I think, is number one. And the more that you look at, like, the more that you observe animals, the more that you understand that that's even more heightened. It's everything that they do is about survival.
Yes.
And it's not. I know, obviously, we live nice lives. We have curtains.
A little easier to survive these days.
A little bit more, but ultimately, I found that out more and more. Having a daughter and a baby, I'm like, oh, like, our job is to literally keep you alive. Like, the first 6 weeks, you're like, this is fundamentally about you just, keeping this small thing alive. And I think it always, when I'm working even in like the minutiae of like performance, I'm trying to piece together this plyometric workout, or speed or power workout, it will constantly revert back, because as soon as I see something prop up in the middle of a session and I'm saying, why is that happening? But it's always going back to, is it an inhibition? Is it a protective mechanism? And ultimately, I think my job is to show people how to unlock levels to that inhibition, because we all have a certain level of inhibition, but we all also have the ability to stick our fingers in a plug socket and shoot ourselves across the room. Right. That idea that the muscles are doing that to our body and not the actual electrical current, it is what we potentially can do, but we just live our lives within that inhibited form. So yeah, it's always kind of full circle for me. So it's always going back to when I'm solving problems, where is this problem coming from? And it's always like, oh, it has to be a technical issue. You can't fundamentally do this. And I'm like, well, sometimes you got to look at it on the flip side. Like, is there an inherent problem here? Problem
Right.
per se. Is it inhibitory?
The what came up for me when you're talking about that is it's interesting, I pretty much only work with professional athletes, so like super elite athletes, and I think this is like one of those things that is like sometimes beneficial to them, but then also to their detriment. And what leads to a lot of training errors is their brain is really good at like overcoming that inhibition before their body's sometimes ready for it. Like they're like, fuck it, like let's just send it. And their body is like, whoa, we're not ready to send it. And so they have these little messages that maybe their joints or the muscles or the connective tissue is telling them, and their brain is just like completely ignoring it. And so where I would probably stop within my plyometric program or my training program, they just like grind through, and you know some oftentimes at the detriment of like eventually that's what like ends up getting them hurt, or
Yeah.
in some scenarios, which and this is when you were helping me with one of my clients, it was like he wasn't very good at speaking up when things didn't feel very good. And it was hard, and because he's such an elite athlete, it was sometimes hard for us to like notice it in his movement patterns. And so it was like he was his own worst enemy most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's funny. I mean, I always discuss this in terms of having like an athlete that, you might have from like a young age. So working with, let's say, a 16-year-old, and they're potentially moving into, becoming someone that could be a professional world-class athlete. And you might look at a time period and say, and you'll see some coaches throw everything, every piece of training possible at that human. And within a couple of years, they kind of become numb to stimuli.
Mhm.
And like, not only do you get training plateaus, but like you say, you also have someone that is really capable of taking themselves to an injured place.
Mhm.
And I think like my job is to give someone a real novel stimulus on a consistent basis so that they are very sensitive to that stimulus
Yeah.
rather than being completely desensitized. So it's really interesting to play with. And obviously, you can take everyone to a point where that you're going to find inhibition, but you can
Right.
also, world class athletes also have that brain where it's like a CrossFitter.
Shut
It's
it.
like,
Yeah.
dig yourself a really deep hole and go and sit in it. And a CrossFitter is someone that's really happy to do that. And that's why they get
Yeah.
so many like catastrophic injuries. And it's the
Yes.
same with world class athletes. And it reminds me of athletes that have been world class. They retire and they don't do anything for a couple of years, but they still have that neural twitch in them. And then they go and
Yeah.
like tear a hamstring doing like the
Yeah.
most basic thing. But it's
Right.
like, it's because you're still outputting enormous forces, but your connective tissue is not ready for it at
No.
all. So it's, yeah, it's that case of, it's like a fine balancing act of, we want we don't want there to be too much inhibition, but we also don't want to be too desensitized, I think. And that goes back to what I mentioned. And we don't have to throw everything at someone. And actually, what does it look like? Like, what are you going to give to this individual in 10 years' time that could potentially be novel, rather than getting there in 10 years' time and being like, we've been doing the same thing every year
Right.
for the last 10 years. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, it's a real hard balancing act.
Yeah. This is true. I'm gonna say, and I think too, like part of it, what we and you kind of spoke to it is like that with the sensitization, like when they ignore all those messages, the body, I feel like it's sometimes like the body is just like, I don't want to say it gives up, but it's just like, fine, like I don't want to fight this fight anymore. Like you're always gonna try to force your way and win. So I'm gonna stop giving you those messages that it's not okay, and I'm just gonna like do whatever you want. And that's sort of like you get yourself in a very
Yeah.
chronic, not so helpful state. And then you're like, they're going back and repeating the training program over and over because they're like, well, this is the way that I get better is doing more. and just grinding through it instead of like what they need to do is just like step back. And
Yep.
it's so frustrating.
Yeah, and it even speaks to like technical ways of doing things. Like if I revert back to like a jumper, so like a high jumper or a triple jumper, the way that they create force potentially then can change as well, which is really fascinating. It's like
Yeah.
how much longer do you now need to spend on the ground because you're avoiding these inhibitions, but you're
Hmm.
also doing it by just offloading things in a certain way. But it also then starts to destroy things technically.
Yeah.
So like the quality of your skills and the quality and the way that you're doing things within your sport also starts to diminish as well. So it's like, yeah, your body's trying to solve the problem, but still everything's still getting worse, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. Well, I want to like let you sort of maybe describe, I don't know how you want to describe it, but like what people, I think fundamentally that like the whole inhibition piece, like it makes sense to me and you because we've been talking about it, but like that's a word probably people are not used to hearing when it comes to
Mm,
plyometrics. So like
mm,
maybe like the phase you're talking about, and then like um some of the, I mean, all the drills, all the exercises you do are good for improving the inhibition, but like some of the really good, like basic ones that we've done, like the deep tier oscillations and yielding stuff, like
yeah.
how that kind of speaks to that overcoming this safety component and like and getting more comfortable, especially post surgery, post injury, post like just not feeling great.
Yeah. Well, plyometrics is fundamentally about breaking down inhibition. The reason why I won't like be a, if I step out of this window, I'm on the first floor and I land, I'm not going to stick the landing and be really tall.
Right.
Inhibition is going to tell me, no, you need to flex the joints because if you take this, if you try to create stiffness at this sort of velocity and amplitude, everything is going to go wrong. And from the very first level, it's how do I protect my skull and how do I protect my vital
Yes.
organs
Yes.
from a
That
very, very big stance. Like that's the number one component to it. So it's the reason why you put your hands out in front of you when you fall, because you want to protect this big, heavy
yeah.
thing on top of your shoulders.
Even though like cognitively you might know this is going to dislocate your shoulder, but
It's,
your body
it's
would
nothing.
rather dislocate your shoulder than give you concussion or
Exactly.
yes.
Exactly.
So good.
So plyometrics are that. They are how could we get you to fall out of a first story building
Yes.
and not crumble and roll out of it like you see someone in parkour.
Right.
So we the Russians did a fantastic job of testing how we can break down that inhibition. So it would have started from a smaller level, and eventually they would have taken it to somewhere where someone's falling off of around, what are we looking at? Kind of 7, 8 feet, which is insane, by the way, because what no one thinks about when you're stood at 7 or 8 feet is that your head, if you're 6 foot, is now at
Yeah,
13,
12 foot. Yeah,
12 foot,
exactly.
right? No one thinks about that. Like
Yeah.
you fall from 7 feet, but actually your head's falling
Yeah,
far,
your
far long.
brain is falling from
Yeah,
way higher, double it.
way higher. So that really is where it's at. We have so many receptors in our body that understand the modulation of force. So when there's a rapid contraction within the or a rapid lengthening within the tissue, we have receptors that can tell us shut it down. Like
Right.
don't fight this force. You're going to completely yield it. Now, plyometrics was initially created so that you could teach those receptors to be blunted a little bit. They're never going to be fully blunted because you can never fight completely, break down that humanistic level of
Right.
don't fall and smash your
Yeah.
head into the floor. So it's about that. It's about breaking down that so that we can maintain those high levels of stiffness because we know as humans we're not very good. We don't I think the worst thing that you can tell someone to do is to move like a cat because a cat, number one, is a quadruped.
Yep.
So they don't just have 2 feet to land on, but they also have a big cushioning from front to back.
Mhm.
And they also have an enormous length between their forefoot and their calcaneus. So they crumple like a slinky does, like
Yeah.
really, really well. We don't do that well. They have
Yeah.
much more mobile hips. So they want to land in that soft position. For us to, and I mean continuing movement as well, not just land and then stop. So
Right.
for humans, we want to land in a stiff position so that we can propel ourselves away. And plyometrics is that wholeheartedly. It's about maintaining high levels of stiffness so we can use that energy to propel ourselves forward. Now, that, like I said, it can start from a really small level in terms of the amplitude that you give yourself. The more height, the more velocity you're taking in, the more that your body has to deal with that rapid stretch. And that rapid stretch is what gives us that elastic energy back. And so, where I really inherited the structure of how I program plyometrics comes from my mentor, and his mentor was part of Eastern Europe. He was a Hungarian guy, but was also taught by the Polish and the Russians. So it's
like in his blood.
in his blood.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it's kind of fed through
Yeah.
fed through that bloodline to me.
Yeah. I
But
think it is.
and so Zoltan was my coach, Eric. It was Eric's mentor, and
Okay.
he showed. It's funnily enough. So the best story ever about deep tier. So deep tier is like, it's kind of like jumping. You're going to land in a really deep range of motion, then you're going to kind of come out of that movement. A good example is like a squat jump on the spot. You're jumping up and down,
Right.
you're absorbing and then leaving the ground. But this is in a whole host of different movements. And Eric, I remember this story from Eric, is Eric had been an athlete for a few years up until that point, and he met Zoltan, and he was like, I was a big, super strong guy. He was a decathlete, probably weighed 220, was 6'5", 230, 6'5", and super strong in the gym. He told me that he used to like do some silly things. It was met Zoltan. Zoltan was like, well, this is how we're going to train. So in the autumn, the fall, he would do a lot of deep tier movements. And Eric said he did his first session. He said we were doing deep tier movements for about 15, 20 minutes. He said I couldn't walk for almost 8 or 9 days after that. So it showed straight away the inherent differences between taking that tissue through length at a slower rate within a more of an overcoming form in weightlifting, because weightlifting is exactly that. It's overcoming from the moment that you're stood there to the moment that you sit down into a squat to the moment that you stand up.
Right.
Whereas the deep tier movements are completely yielding in a way. You want to allow your body to drop into that deep range of motion and actually allow there to be slack to then be caught at the bottom and find more of a reflexive action. The reason why you don't get this beautiful bounce out of the bottom of a heavy squat is you can't find a reflex when you're when you're fighting force with force. There is no reflexive capacity to your body.
Right.
So the deep tier was about finding reflexes at deeper ranges. And Eric told me about the muscle damage that it did. And he was like, what have you done to, calling him up? Like, what have you done to us? Like, we don't like, we're really strong athletes. We've been lifting weights for 5 years. And Zoltan was like, this isn't the same thing. This is inherently completely different. And so how I inherited it, I went through the same experience of being like, what is this? Like, I don't understand. We're doing like 5 exercises and I walk away like, what have you done to us, Eric? Like, it's so inherently different to what we're used to. And so it taught me a lot being an athlete in it for 10 years and having coached it now for 6 or 7 years. And it really shows to me how you can use this from really any point within a human's journey, of whether they're looking to be returning from a catastrophic injury or whether you're a world-class athlete. The world-class athlete stuff, like I was in track and field. Everyone spends the whole of their life in track and field, really tall and stiff. That's what they love to do. So when we flip that mechanism, it becomes this like therapeutic way of loading the system and tissue. And it's just something very opposing to what they would normally do. So like, it is so important for that community of athletes for me. But going back to someone that is returning from a major injury, they come to me with this massive trauma, despite, a PT or a therapist or whoever has looked after that athlete, returned them back from a surgery and said, all right, okay, now you can get into dynamic movement. And then they come to me and I'm like, wow, this is how much you still can't do. You
Yeah.
really cannot receive force at any form of velocity when you take it any deeper than like 2 inches of flexion at your hip and your knee and your ankle.
Right.
So what does it tell me? It tells me that this trauma still creates this inhibition and block. And it tells me that every time we drop you into deeper ranges of motion, you're fighting force with force. You are overcoming the force. Because I often get feedback and saying, I'm so sore the first few times of doing some deep tier movements when they get back into those more dynamic training sessions after surgery. And it's because I know that they've been trying to overcome. They're like so scared and they want to fight it.
Right.
But as soon as it gets to a stage, and obviously there's a training effect there too, but as soon as they can relax, it's like, oh, this is like not doing anywhere near the damage that it was initially doing because I'm not fighting that.
Yeah.
So I look at it as a bandwidth, and I look at it as a bandwidth as, let's just talk about it. There's, you're holding like a 2 or 3 inch bandwidth where you're dropping down into like a deep squat. There's going to be a point where you find a bandwidth of space where you just really don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And for me, it's about living in that bandwidth where you don't want to be. Obviously, to a point where there's not necessarily pain or discomfort.
Right.
But if we can get you to a point where you're like, I really don't want to be, like, I'm almost flinchy and I'm like, I can feel that inhibition in me and I'm like shaking and my body's telling me no. But actually, I know as the coach, and I can observe it, you're safe, you're in a fine environment.
Right.
It's not, I say speed as well. It's not speed. It's in a controlled manner. And even some of these oscillatory movements, like you can hold on to something. I don't care whether there is something that you can stabilize your body with. But actually with those oscillations, so we might sit down and let's say it's a parallel squat position in like a standard leaping action, bilateral. Let's say that we just oscillate in that you're going to go slightly below parallel and slightly above parallel. And to start with, you don't even need to leave the ground. And that's your first like, okay, cool. What's happening here is I'm starting to take it through that range. What's nice is I can build a really high volume of work there. And secondly, I'm also getting amazing pump of that muscle as well. That muscle is, you stand up and your legs feel like they are full of blood. So to me, if there's anything residual still in there, it's going to completely flush that system out as well. And it normally a lot of guys also then say, God, my quads and hamstrings and glutes just felt so good the following day after doing that.
Yeah.
So it's going to give that almost protective feeling of being like, you know what, the other muscles around it that aren't, maybe it's an ACL injury and you're getting a really good quad pump from it. Normally you're going to feel pretty good the next day if it's in that kind of case. So it then would ramp up from not leaving the ground to leaving the ground. And that leaving the ground moment is a moment where that drop or the eccentric moment of that movement is what's going to induce just a tad more velocity. And in that flight phase, we want to get an athlete to be relaxed in a way so that they're not tensing up and feeling that inhibition again.
Right.
And it's about
like matching their anticipation for like, because
exactly.
in their brain, they're like anticipating the worst, which you're like, no, it's not, you're not jumping from 12 feet. You're
exactly. So there's always the idea as well that we need to anticipate and we need to be really stiff and tight and tense. And actually we know in so much just research and anecdotally, you can see it immediately. Someone that is super tense, I used to use the phrase like rocks don't bounce. So if you are tight like a rock, you are not going to bounce. There is going to be no length to that tissue. And if you're able to stay relaxed and then contract at the right moment and in the fastest manner possible, which the best athletes in the world do, they ramp it up the fastest and they do it in the fastest time frame too. And like we're talking like 80% maximal voluntary contractions of the lower leg are seen in like high level plyometrics, which is insane. Like you're not touching anything and you're able to contract that muscle at that amplitude.
Yeah.
That's impressive. And it's done in like under 0.2 of a second. It's rapid.
Yeah.
So what does it take for you to get to being able to relax and then contract at the right time? Because I think that's also, you also go through that ebb and flow of things of coming from trauma, living a lot of your time in a highly contracted
Mm-hmm.
state of trying to protect that. So if
Mm-hmm.
I can get you to be comfortable with relaxing and contracting in more rhythmical fashions, I just call it greasing the groove, and like everything slides better, everything moves more in sync, everything is much more stronger in terms of the connection with the neuromuscular system. Like the neuromuscular system loves smooth connections. It likes rhythm. It likes to
Mm-hmm.
feel that internal beat sort of thing. So if you can get your muscles and everything in turn to work in the same way, that's great. But if something's tense on one side and you're still trying to create that rhythm, it's just you're just not going to feel it.
Yeah. That rhythmical pattern is like so interesting. Like you said, like all parts of our system like just thrive off of it. And
Hmm.
like the ability to switch back and forth, like that's fundamentally like what our nervous system does with like our breath cycle, right? Like a little bit, we inhale, it's more sympathetic, we exhale, it's more parasympathetic. And what makes us super resilient and like best regulated is one that can switch back and forth really easily. But
Yeah,
people get stuck in that,
yeah,
yeah, that protective mode, and they lose the ability to switch back and forth. And so, I mean, man, yeah, it always comes down to rhythm. And we talked a little bit before I push record about the fascial fitness world. And I think this is that feeling the guys get sometimes after the, you said like the day after they feel so much better. And that rhythm from a fascial standpoint too is like really what actually rehydrates the fascia. And so I think that's what people are feeling is like it's when you're constantly in a contraction of the muscle, not, like we have to kind of like think of this concept of the muscle, like even though they're an integrated unit, there's
yeah,
like still separate things, right? There's the muscle cells and the muscle elastic tissue that is holding that concentric contraction when you're in a protected mode. And when it's doing like that, it's like wringing out a towel, right? It's
yeah,
wringing out all the fluid from the fascia as well as the blood flow to the area.
yeah,
And so whenever then if you do any exercise that starts to break down the connective tissue or load the joint in a way, you're not getting the flushing of the vascular system through there as well, in addition to the actual water content within the fascia that keeps us like an animal, like this like a wonderful ability for elastic recoil to happen and for a muscle to be able to move through the phases of concentric and eccentric contraction, which makes us so efficient. And so it's just so interesting to me because I think that's sometimes like again, because people are so used to being so stiff, like either they're used to being stiff because they're the elite athlete who, like our elite track athletes who are just used to relying on that stiffness and they're really good at it, or they're so stiff because they're untrained, deconditioned, and their fascia is dehydrated, and so they have that. And so it's just, yeah, like I said, it's just really interesting to me that fundamentally, even though the science is telling us, right, that movement is the best way to rehydrate the tissues, not massage, not any like tool, but
yeah,
like a rhythmical movement is the thing. But yet it's not what we go to when something feels tight, right? It like we instantly, especially in the rehab world, we instantly go to trying to overcome the protective pattern with deep tissue massage, which you're still forcing and like beating things up to trying to get it to submit.
yeah,
Or you go to some sort of like massage tool or a stretch, which you're trying to overcome these reflexes that are like, again, fundamentally built in to protect you. And so it's like just wild to me. And I did years ago, I did this when I was learning a bunch about fascial fitness and fascia, one of my mentors, she had really bad arthritis in her knees. One knee was like so like valgus, like bone on bone, like bow-legged position here that you'd see her walk and be like, yeah, she's like very close to knee replacement. She's a Pilates based movement practitioner, and she like also in this fascial fitness world was like, okay, I'm going to start adding elastic recoil and rhythmical training into what I do and loading my body in this way. And she totally changed the shape of her knee joint
Wow.
by remodeling the fascia in this way. And so using that as kind of an inspiration, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start tempo running in a tempo or a cadence that I know the studies have showed us are the most efficient. And if it's the most efficient, it means that it's the like you're in your connective tissue, right? You're in that elastic recoil, which is the 175 to the 185 beats per minute. So I started training all these little, I would do drills like little like A skip, B skips type things or little like ankle skips. And then I eventually took it into just a greater hip separation into running. And I would run like that. And the first thing I noticed was, whoa, the connective tissue disruption and the amount of like delayed onset muscle soreness I had, just like you described in your guys adding in the deep tier. And then, but then what I found is not only did my joints not hurt when I ran anymore because they weren't getting the compression, right? The body was anticipating and like yielding that force instead of like jamming it into my joints. But my ankle mobility rapidly increased way more than any joint mobilization, any stretch, any soft tissue ever did. And so that was when I was like, oh. And what was happening was like two things. One, I was overcoming that, you know, the tendency for my muscles to just be like in protective mode, holding everything on. So the elastic components of my ankle dorsiflexion was improving. But then also I was remodeling my connective tissue that had been in such a shortened position for so long because of that holding on protection pattern that then I was able to load it in a way and it started remodeling itself. So then I kept the range of motion. And it was like such a mind-blowing thing, and this is probably what you felt too, and I think that what sometimes sets people apart in the world of teaching and coaching is like you experienced this for 10 years as an athlete before you ever started like teaching it, and like that practical experience of feeling these changes in your body is like so important, like because me and you can speak all day about the powerful benefits of it, but it's like even back then when I started in this fascial fitness world, I really didn't fully appreciate what plyometrics or rhythmic elastic recoil did for our overall health and wellness until I just felt it in my own body.
Yeah. It's just it's fascinating about the tempo running stuff because there is everyone has their own tempo as well. Like I think that it is in a place where there isn't that inhibition. So if you could get everyone to find that spot and then gradually build up that capacity to get into what the kind of research suggests is like the prime kind of cadence and stuff.
I will say that when I started it, I noticed that in my own body. Like the sweet spot for me when I first started was like 162 to 165 beats per minute.
Yeah.
But then as I started doing it more, I noticed that I could increase. I actually felt more comfortable and had to increase my cadence. But it was like feeling that sweet spot where you don't feel the inhibition. Like you're like, oh yeah, like I could like ride, I could bounce on this like bouncy ball like all day long.
And you know what's really telling as well is I mean, having been a high jumper, I never ever wanted to do anything over like 200 meters of running, right? And it was all because I genuinely could not run at a certain speed to be able to do like a 5K.
Yeah.
Like plodding along, what I would have had to have done is my training format would have had to have been running at like a tempo speed and gradually teach myself how to increase the distance that I could handle the tempo speed.
Right.
Not start slow and be able to do that 5K and gradually speed it up. It would be the other way around. It would be about increasing the endurance capacity of that speed.
Exactly. That's how I did that training, and it was like,
I could not plod. I could not plod. My calves and all the other big stabilizing muscles just blew up so quickly. Like it felt
Mhm.
like my legs were swollen because I could not find an internal rhythm and get a good synchronization to the connective tissue. I'd
Yes.
much prefer just being real bouncy and people being like, you're never going to hold that for 5K. But like that would have been, had to have been the way that I would have
Yeah.
had to have attack it. I just
Mhm.
cannot plod along. And I still can't to this day. Like I
Yeah.
remember trying to do it maybe 2 years ago. I mean, like, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to try it for 6 weeks. And
Mhm.
I just gave up. I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm just going to have to run the other way around. I'm going to have to do more
I
speed.
literally had to, like, have a metronome on
Yeah.
in my earphones and,
Yeah.
like, stay on the metronome,
Mm.
and that's actually, like, when I knew I was done, like, with the distance I was running, is, like, when I can't
When
keep
you're
on
out
the
of sync.
metronome anymore, like, that is, like, fatigue, like
That is, and that is so far forward thinking with regards to like a lot of endurance coaches as well. It's
yeah.
fascinating how not enough people realize like the detriment of not doing something like that and
Yeah.
understand. Obviously, you're going to push past a certain threshold and try to maintain it, but like for a lot of your training, staying within a realm where your soft tissue and your tendons are really doing a great job.
Yeah.
Like I always go back to Mo Farah that won the 5 and 10K in
Mhm.
the Olympics. And my coach and I used to laugh at like the endurance groups at our track and say those guys are running with their muscles for 4,600 meters and then
Mhm.
trying to cool their tendons for the
Yeah.
last 400.
Yeah.
Whereas Mo Farah has been bouncing on his tendons for 4,600 meters and then can say, right, muscles, give me everything you possibly
Yeah,
got.
and then has the energy stored to still do it
Has the
because he
energy,
hasn't been wasting any energy.
just depletedly plodding around. And it's because,
Mhm.
what did you see? They'd go to the track and they were like, let's say 1,500-meter runners. And they're
Yeah.
doing like back-to-back 800s. And
Yeah.
you're like, look how slow this is. This is just nowhere near race pace.
No.
So like, yeah,
Makes
that was always the way that we looked at it. It's like bounce on tendons as long as you possibly can and then call upon your muscles.
Yeah, and then, like, let your body tell you when when you've trained enough, like,
Yeah.
and then rest it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, I mean, and we talked about that too, like, how your philosophies sort of match a little bit of the fascial fitness standpoint as, like, in your programming, you're, like, 1 to 2 times a week for the more actual plyometric stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
when you're and this is what the fascial fitness is, like, when you're in that elastic recoil energy saving mode, it's like any more than 1 to 2 times a week, and you actually probably do worse for your body when it comes to tendon remodeling
Yeah.
and, and remodeling is nothing more than, like, tendon building, right?
Yeah.
So remodeling, building, same thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge, huge thing that most people just ignore because we're so set in this mindset of, like, no pain, no gain. And it's
Yeah.
like, no.
Yeah. Sorry, there's someone. I think that leaf blowers outside. I don't know if you can hear
Oh,
them.
I can't hear it.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you're good.
There's, and again, right, there's that. Where's the sweet spot for those plyometrics, right? So
Mhm,
again, I play with bandwidths. As soon as you go past too much volume for that given individual, you creep outside that bandwidth, or you slide that bandwidth down to a slower model of
mhm,
how you're trying to achieve something. And therefore, the remodeling becomes very different. It becomes, is it more that you are overworking the muscle to achieve the same jump height? And actually, what you want is you want to maintain the speed of the ground contact
mhm,
and use the tendon for its elastic recall rather than just trying to grunt through a couple more reps or
mhm.
a whole other frequency of or an added session. So it's, unfortunately, it's like less is more all the time with it, but you got to live to fight another day
For
and
sure.
understand where you can push certain movements and where you shouldn't. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's
Well, and this, I think, too, comes down to, like, fundamentally understanding, eh, like, what is the intention of each exercise you're doing, right? Like, because if you do look at, like, a week of, like, a sprinter, like, they you can work on starts one day, and that's not plyometrics. That's like
Yep.
you overcoming,
Yep.
and like accelerating. Like that is you like
Very
creating.
concentric, push, push,
Right,
push.
that's more like weightlifting than it is plyometric, and so it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you can work on starts one day and then do plyos and a lot of your sprinting work and jumping work or, whatever whatever event you're in on one day, and then, like, then you're just, like, doing, again, weight room stuff or, like, like, postural technique stuff, like, understanding too, like, what each exercise is doing, which I don't think very people are very good at that, and that's what then they do that training area and they end up doing jumping or plyometric things every day, and I even remember when I first learned about the fascial fitness loading parameters, I was working at Exos at the time, and we might have been called athletes performance back then, but I remember going to Mark and being like, you know, I'm learning something that's like questioning us doing plyometrics 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And, his argument was, well, we're doing linear on Monday, Thursday, and lateral multi-directional on Tuesday, Friday. And so like you're stressing different vectors and like it, which is not wrong, but I'm just like, you're playing on a very like,
Yeah.
I'm like, whether you're doing multi-directional bounds or
Yeah.
linear bounds, like it's
You, s-
basically the same tissue.
you
It's your
still
lower extremity.
believe me, it's not like you've got like the lateral Achilles coming in or the
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, I think we're just doing, like, I think we're like, we should change our programming up. And this is like the tough part. Like, this is the tough part. Like I said, when it's ingrained that this is what you do
yeah.
plyos 4 days a week, but just different direction of them. I'm like, it's still plyos 4 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah. You're still getting the neuromuscular stimulus there.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how that recovers is going to be detrimental to how you then stretch that tissue on the day that you are, doing a different form. You're still
Mhm.
going to struggle to elicit those fast contractions to pull on that tendon.
Mhm.
It's not going to be there. So what do? You get less of a pull, and you get more of a muscular action, and it becomes slower, and it's compounding.
Yeah.
It just So
Crazy. Well, and that's what I like appreciated too with the yielding exercises that you have too, is it's like those are something that to the athlete's brain feels like a plyometric. So
mhm.
it feels like you're checking that box, but it's not necessarily. And it's so low level that you can stand to do a high volume of it without really neurally fatiguing yourself or like eliciting a huge breakdown of the tendons,
Yeah,
right? So, yes, we talked about how you're getting the hydration component of it, which is so important, but you're not breaking down the tissue, which is actually what is the remodeling and the building components of it.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
it is like it's been such a powerful. I mean, I loved adding that in my athlete's work because one, he had a ton of inhibition from getting hurt
yeah,
from the amount of injuries that he'd had on that knee in his body in general, and the fact that he was trying to do two sports, one which is tall and stiff, and the other which is
yeah,
absorbing forces and cutting. And so this is like the more time we could work on the inhibition piece. Plus, we were trying to push forward through an accelerated rehab. So
yeah,
it was like those became such wonderful tools for us to overcome a lot of the pain inhibition he was having, and also the pain,
yeah,
um, and his muscles were like always sort of stuck in that protective mode because we were pushing the envelope so much. The yielding exercises allowed for that blood flow and for things to like it was like his favorite thing to do on a warm up, right? Because
yeah,
it was he always said it was very similar feeling to doing like wall sits for a
yeah,
warm up.
yeah,
So
exactly. And I think we don't pay enough attention, and we don't give enough credit to the neuromuscular depletion of being in like a contracted protective way as well.
yes,
And that
it's exhausting.
therefore it gives us that like gives us that like relaxing kind of energy to us. So like, again, I go back to that like phrase of it being like therapeutic in a way, and
Mhm.
that you can come away and it feels this, you have that relaxed state where you're
Mhm.
not like, it feels like you're just constantly holding a little bit of your breath. That
Mhm.
kind of like, oh, I can't quite relax and let that go. So you
Mhm.
get into dynamic movement and you're like, you just don't have that ability to give yourself that bandwidth of space to work within. It's just shortened and everything is like
Yeah.
high breathing and like I can't quite get into that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's something very
It's funny too, because again, like going back to the crossover with the nervous system, it's like, when a baby's upset and like tense, like what do? You bounce it to feel better, right? Like this oscillating thing is like literally built into our nervous system to relax, to
my
calm
my
down.
wife my wife
Yeah.
is constantly being like, "Why are you bouncing? Like, why?" And
Yeah.
it was the same when I had I so our daughter's now 2.5, so we don't have to like bounce her and
Yeah.
relax her like that. But if I pick up someone else's baby, the first thing I start to do is bounce them. And my
Mhm.
wife's like, "What are you bouncing them for?" I'm like, it's just this rhythm." This is
Ingrained, yeah, it's just
great.
ingrained, and I think it's so interesting. I One of my favorite tricks I tell people when they have, because especially like non-athlete physical therapy clinic, or people come in and the patient's like, "Oh my god, I just had the most stressful experience getting here," right? Like either work was crazy or
Yeah.
traffic was crazy, and then they get in the door for PT and you've got an hour with them and they're like talking a million miles a minute because they're fucking amped up. And so I used to grab two physio balls, and I would sit I was like, "Oh, here, come, let's sit and talk." And I'd have them tell their story, and I wouldn't even tell them to bounce.
Yeah.
I would just start bouncing,
Love it.
and then we mirror each other, right? So you start bouncing,
Yeah.
and then pretty soon they're telling a story and they just get quieter and quieter and quieter and quieter. And then I'm like, "Okay, now let's start our treatment."
Yeah.
And it was just like such a powerful way to like shift their nervous system really quick
Mhm.
into more of safety and this therapeuticness. And so it was just like,
Yeah.
again, like I think that is like us. Obviously, I like working with you and learning. I've learned a lot, and part of the learning a lot is like organizing thoughts that were already in my head, but I didn't know how to assimilate it into a plyometric
Yeah.
movement world. But then also like, yeah, just explaining things in a way that I'm like, oh, fundamentally, this like makes so much sense. Like
Mm. That's what
bouncing.
that's what that we I mean, like I was just watching my daughter and she does not stop
Yeah.
bouncing. She's just like, I'm
Oh,
just having a conversation with her. She's like this. And I'm like,
yes, bouncing
oh
around.
goodness, what's happening?
That's some of my friends with older kids. They had a trampoline in their backyard, and I was like, you know what? When your kids get in a dysregulated state, where they're clearly like mouthing
Yeah.
off to you or just like spiraling. Sometimes they would come home from school with like homework and just so much stress from school and emotions of being like a teenager.
Mm,
I'm like, you know what? Instead of fighting with them, when they walk in the door, send them outside and tell them that they have to jump on the trampoline
yeah.
for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, I dare you. There is no way that you can go jump on a trampoline for 2 minutes and not be in a good mood when you're done.
So
It totally shifts your state. And so I'm like, again, it goes back to that, like,
it
fundamental
does.
bouncing,
Yeah.
and anything rhythmical, right? Because like, dancing's like that too. It's like, if we had music constantly played in our head when we're walking down the street, there would not be that many angry people in the world.
No. No.
It's hard to be mad when you're in this
Hard to
rhythmical, like,
yeah.
bouncing state.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
Yeah, and
I feel like
our
yeah.
kids are our best teachers, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you're seeing.
There's so much to that. And I almost want to you almost want to find out like what the reason is, but I think it is just that holistic view of it, like how the neuromuscular system talks to the rest of the body and how it operates is just massive. I just think it's just so valuable, and
Mhm,
our muscles like to move like that. We like to have that contract relax mechanism to it. Um, and obviously the harder tissues like that as well. They like to be stimulated like
mhm,
that. And then we've got our organs that like to move in it. I think that they like to move in a certain way. And I'm still, it's a really random thought to come out with, but like I always wonder if there's something to do with even like CTE with how the
yes,
brain with how the
yeah.
brain
Yeah,
is
pumps the fluids and get rid of the
yeah
mhm.
and it has that
100%.
ability to contract and relax around, like
Mhm.
encapsulating the brain in the skull. I'm sure plyometrics. I would love to see the recollection of just people that had CTE and who had done a lot of plyometric training and who
Yeah.
hadn't. I'd be fascinated
Well,
to see.
and, like, how good like, I mean, and this goes back to sort of, like, this is where my brain goes too in terms of when I think about this stuff. I'm like, yeah, going back to that fundamental thing we talked about is, like, but the body is, like, the reason for inhibition is to, like, protect the organs. Like, the reason, like, this is how our body is, like, designed. And the studies of the CTE too are coming out that even people who didn't sustain a head injury concussion are having CTE
Mhm.
and or having post concussion like syndrome without ever having a concussion. And when you think about how the body works when it comes to like physics in the body works, right? Like our head is at the end of a big on long flexible thing like a whip. And so
Mm.
every motion, every time, like, and we've all felt this, you stepped off a curb, not realizing the curb was there, and you landed and you felt this whole energy go through your body, right? And the last thing to whip is your head and your brain. And so what I see with the athletes, especially when I think about adding in this visceral manipulation work is not only do I see a lot of, like, container stiffness in their
Mm.
brain, or
Mm.
not their brain, their cranium, which when the container's stiff, then it limits the blood flow and cerebrospinal fluid
Yep.
and vascular fluid from recycling the damaged goods, right? That's,
Yeah.
like, a huge indicator in CTE and, like, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all the neurodegenerative diseases. But I see their ligaments around their heart being super stiff. And part of that, I think, you know, is that they're running at such high speeds and then they're either stopping on their own, right? They're either cutting and
Yep.
changing direction, but their organs are still accelerating in the
Oh,
way
yeah.
they were, right? And the ligaments have to check it. And so the ligament gets stiffer and stiffer. And when the ligaments of like that hold our heart in space get stiff, it makes our heart have to work harder and the muscle have to work harder to pump the blood because it doesn't have the fascial elastic recoil of the pericardial sac, in the movement of our breath. And so I think, and I think I've said this on a podcast before, but I talk about it in my courses a lot, is like one of the things with NFL athletes is the incidence of heart attack after they retire. And it used to be thought it was just because, like, they gain weight because they're not working out, they eat poorly, or they ate poorly during their when they were an athlete and got away with it, and now they can't get away with it because 'cause they're
Yeah.
not working out. But what we've seen over the years is a healthier type of athlete go through the league,
Yeah.
and then when they retire, they're still pretty healthy, and so but they're still having heart attacks at a really young age, and I think
Mm.
this is part of it.
Yeah.
And so then when I think about all the athletes and how they're not very good at yielding and, like,
Yeah.
controlling the forces when they're getting really good at producing high forces of movement and
Yeah.
high velocities of movement, but they're not very good at controlling it. And so I'm like, yeah, where does that go? Energy is not created or destroyed. It has to go somewhere. So
Mm.
it gets stored in all of those tissues that are holding the organs in because the organs don't have a benefit of muscles around it to protect it, right?
Mm.
They just
Yeah.
have the connective tissue. And
Yeah.
so it's so
I
interesting that
I
that's
I
where your
found it
brain's going too.
I found it fascinating when we were doing I was doing my masters and we had someone come in. This was a while ago. We're talking 2015, 16, and we had a guy come in and talk about CTE because I think that it was getting pretty popular around that, or
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
the
Yeah,
understanding.
like the movie Concussion, I think came
Yeah,
out around that time.
it was in
Yeah.
and around there. And this guy had, had been doing studies on woodpeckers and why a
Mhm.
woodpecker doesn't get CTE and concussion.
Yeah.
And one of the fundamental parts of it was that they saw that the woodpecker, when they came into contact with the wood, they would stick their tongue at the end of their beak.
Uh-huh.
And so it was like pointing their tongue out.
Yeah.
And they thought that it was based on them being able to relax their neck muscles in a certain way, but also be able to. My anatomy in and around here is not great, but it was able
And
to.
I'm a woodpecker, so dare
Yeah.
you not know woodpecker anatomy.
It was doing something where something in the neck was pulling down and allowing more of like a solidified position of the
Yeah,
brain and the skull, so it wasn't rattling around as
yeah.
much. But also that there was rhythm to how they did it,
Mhm.
and there was a relax and contract way of doing it rather than coming in completely tense.
They're not just, like, banging their head against the wall. That's
Exactly.
what it looks like, but it's actually a very,
It
like
is. If you slow it
yeah.
down, it's like a
Mhm.
really smooth action.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was fascinating. I don't know what had come from that and whether there was anything that was learned from that, but yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, so interesting. I just I think yeah, I mean, problems like that, the CTE and the heart attacks and the ACL epidemic, not to put ACLs in the same category
Mm,
as CTE or heart attacks, but also it's like an epidemic.
yeah,
Um, I think there is just like so much to learn about like it's that opens up a whole nother can of worms, but it's just like
yeah,
how we're training landing mechanics and how we're training like cutting.
yeah,
I think we're fundamentally getting it wrong.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and
It's
if we could like look at it from this perspective like you do, with the nervous system safety and um the just yeah, feeling safe in ranges of motion, being able to like absorb and yield to the forces, like I think that athletes would be more protected from
yeah,
ACL tears as well as
yep, yeah. I mean, it's the
down the
same with
line.
it's the same
And
with
it's
yeah. I mean, the Achilles epidemic is also right up
yeah,
there.
Achilles. I mean, it's all like the same mechanism, right? Like I just had this talk with the athlete that we worked with together. I was like, because one of the things that's sort of lingering for him is some like soleus, like that, like that
Hanging out the
protective
towel.
mechanism on soleus. Exactly.
Yeah,
And I'm like, listen, like, we can't ignore the fact that, 7 months before you tore your ACL, you strained your soleus, and
yeah.
then the team rushed you back faster than you should have been from that.
Soleus
I
is
was
your
like,
biggest stability muscle in your lower leg. It
yes,
is the stabilizer of stabilizers. Like it
yeah,
takes the biggest load out of any muscle in the body per square inch of how big it is, right?
right. And then it's like, what motion does it also check? Tibial anterior translation, which is how
Yeah,
do you tear your ACL?
yeah, yeah,
Tibial anterior translation. So it's like, I mean, yeah, it
yeah,
can like I'm like
yeah.
fundamentally, like, we're
Mhm.
still looking at the same, like, the thing that drove the ACL problem is, like, probably, like, still the thing that's limiting him from, like,
Yeah,
like, fully getting past this, like, inhibition and, like, getting back to what he wants to do, and
yeah,
so it's like I was like, "You can't." I said, "I know there's a lot to, like, work on right now in training and, like, in your body." I was like, "But, like, you keep skipping this, like, fundamental piece
yeah,
of you're avoiding letting your knee come forward with things and, like, using your soleus in a way that it gets to express all of its ranges of motion, right? Like, this full, like, eccentric, like, let it absorb some like, let it yield." I'm like, "But."
yeah. Well, and if it doesn't fully do its job, then its job of pulling on the Achilles also starts to lack, and or
Exactly.
it overloads the Achilles and potentially then crops up Achilles issues, and then
Yeah.
it
'Cause
becomes
it's like when they're in that protective mode, they can't do anything but be in that protective mode. There's no more you can't go into eccentric contraction, and you can't do a concentric contraction because 'cause you're already there, so you can't
yeah,
concentrically contract anymore.
yeah, yeah,
It's,
yeah,
so so interesting to me.
yeah,
It's so like and it's like one of those things that it's like, well, it seems so simple. You're doing all these, like, things that theoretically should be doing it, but I'm like, also, he's a really good athlete that can get away with doing things wrong. So,
mhm, yeah. So much to learn.
Right? So much to learn. Well, I know we talked about doing this for an hour, so we're pretty much there. And I thank you. Obviously, we could talk. We know we could talk about this like for hours at a time.
Oh,
Um, I appreciate you so much being a guest on the podcast. I appreciate your help with my athlete and just being somebody I can throw ideas like this around with. Like, it's so great. How can everyone like where do we find you and what do you got for my people? Because I
well,
know you
thank
got a
you
lot.
for having me on, number one, and thank you
Yeah.
for giving me the opportunity to speak to the community and to work with that athlete as well. Like
Yeah.
it's just having that problem solving between the two of us as well, and being able to communicate like that is, I think, it's special and it doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
So it means a lot. They can reach out to me at McInnes Watson on Instagram, MCINNESWATSON, or they can just go to Plus Plyos, plusplyos.com. I've got a course, an introduction to plyometrics course, which feel free to take. We've had almost 1,000 people take it now. So so it's been really, really great in just being able to distill some of the points that we've spoken about a lot,
Yeah.
with like systematically what it looks like to have fast and more yielding based movements, how that's programmed and so on. We've got a program as well. So like we've gone through like how we think things should be done, but just do some of it and understand what this stuff feels like before you throw it to your athletes.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really important. So yeah, you can get like our subscription is like a wide open thing. You can just like Netflix, you can grab, we've got like 30 different programs. We have a yielding program on there as well, which people absolutely love. So yeah, so that's mainly what we do. We run seminars as well.
You've got one coming up in Austin?
No, we're
Tennessee.
doing one in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I'm trying to arrange one potentially in California, but we'll see
cool.
over the next couple of months or so.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll make sure that we link all of that in the show notes for everybody. And
thank you. Appreciate your time. And yeah, it's been good.
You too. Thank you so much.